Great. Let's get started. So welcome to the Last Drop Water Researchers Speaker Series. This speaker series is brought to you by the University of Manitoba's Sustainable Development Goal 6 Working Group. So in 2018, the University of Manitoba was named the United Nations Academic Impact Hub, or the UNAI Hub for Sustainable Development Goal 6 on clean water and sanitation. We are the only academic institution who holds this UNAI designation in North America. So this SDG 6 working group at U of M brings together established and emerging scholars and leaders who have a shared interest in freshwater sustainability and who work collaboratively with local, national, and global partners to address issues related to water. Our many members include researchers from the Clayton H. Riddell Faculty of Environment, Earth and Resources, the Faculty of Agriculture and Food Sciences, Faculty of Arts, the Price Faculty of Engineering, and the Faculty of Science, as well as collaborators from the Center for Advancement of Teaching and Learning, Center for Human Rights Research, Center for Earth Observation Science, and the Office of Sustainability. The SDG Working Group's expertise spans multiple disciplines, including researchers from the humanities, social sciences, and STEM fields. My name is Nicole Wilson. I'm an assistant professor and Canada Research Chair in Arctic Environmental Change and Governance at the Center for Earth Observation Science in the C.H.R. Faculty of Environment, Earth and Resources. I co-chair this group with Claire Herbert, who is incidentally one of our presenters today. In this virtual format, we're all coming from different locations. So I want to take a minute to acknowledge that I am located here on University of Manitoba's Fort Garry campus in Winnipeg, Manitoba, within Treaty 1 and on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Red River Métis Nation. In the theme of today's panel, or presentation, I also want to acknowledge that my drinking water comes from Shoal Lake, through the Winnipeg Aqueduct, which has been constructed in 1919 at the expense of Shoal Lake 40 First Nations water security. So I believe that the chat is available for you to introduce yourselves. Let us know where you're all coming from today if you're not in Winnipeg. And for those outside of Winnipeg, it would also be great for you to share where your drinking water comes from, if you know. So today is the fourth talk in our series by Phoenix Combe and Claire Herbert. Before we begin, I'll just mention a couple of logistics. We've enabled closed captioning functions, so please feel free to turn that on as needed. We'll be recording this event. We are already recording and hosting it on the UM Sustainability YouTube channel after the talk. So please mute yourself during the presentation. I think Pauline will be able to put a link in the chat to the YouTube channel. The presentation will last about 30 minutes and there'll be time for a Q&A at the end, so feel free to put questions in the Q&A box. Finally, I'd like to say for members of the audience who would like to learn more or join the SDG Working Group, you can visit our website and we'll put a link in the chat for that as well. There you can find a list of upcoming talks in the series, as well as links to recordings from last year, as well as last semester. So now let's begin. I'll pass it over to Phoenix Combe and Claire Herbert. First, let me just provide a little bit of a bio for them each. So they'll be presenting on the creation of the Manitoba Métis Federation's Weatherkeeper program. Phoenix Combe is a Métis Climate Monitoring Coordinator with the Manitoba Métis Federation, or MMF, and holds a B.Sc in Biology and a B.Env in Forest Ecology from the University of Winnipeg, and it is recognized through the Canadian Institute of Forestry. She's also a proud Red River Métis Citizen of the MMF. Through her work at the MMF, Phoenix is responsible for the coordination of the Red River Métis Citizen science programs, which engages Red River Métis citizens in the monitoring of climate, water, land, and wildlife across their national homeland. This program hosts many citizen science events through the year that integrate Western science with Red River Métis traditional knowledge, to increase environmental literacy. Co-presenting with Phoenix today, we have Claire Herbert, who is a data coordinator for the Canadian Watershed Information Network and program coordinator for the Manitoba Great Lakes Program, both hosted at the Center for Earth Observation Science within the C.H.R. faculty of Environment, Earth, and Resources. Claire also, again, as I mentioned, co-chairs the UNAI Sustainable Development Goal 6 group with me. Her research area kind of focuses on freshwater data, water quality, and management, looking at the effects of climate change on in-lake processes and algal toxins in the upper Manitoba Great Lakes. So I'm really looking forward to this talk, and I'll hand it over to our speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicole. So I'm going to start sharing, and Phoenix is going to present the majority of our talk today. You should be good to go.
Hopefully you can hear me okay. Perfect. So thank you, Nicole, for that introduction, and Claire for doing the slides for me today. As you mentioned, I am a proud Red River Métis citizen for the MMF, so this is really great for a great opportunity for me to speak on our programming, and it's an even more amazing opportunity that I actually get to work for the government that holds my citizenship, so it's great. So sorry, just having some technical, there we go, perfect. So yeah, so thank you everyone for coming today to listen to my presentation on the Manitoba Métis Federation's Weatherkeeper program. You guys have already heard a little bit about myself, but I would like to go just to the next slide if you could, Claire. Thank you. Yeah, that's myself there. That's me doing some field work up in Gillam, Manitoba. So my work through the MMF, as Nicole mentioned, I am responsible for the citizen scientist programs, which engages our Red River Métis citizens on environmental monitoring. So that includes providing them training and equipment, as well as developing programs for them to go out and then collecting that data in our baseline data catalog. So you can go to the next slide, please, Claire.
Oh, and as Phoenix mentioned, I'm Claire Herbert, and Nicole already gave you all my different hats I wear, so I won't bore you with them again. I work within the Center for Earth Observation Science at the Clayton H. Riddle Faculty of Environment, Earth, and Resources at the University of Manitoba. And at the bottom of the screen is just one of the images from our SDG 6 working group. And on the left is just an image of me in the field on the upper Manitoba Great Lakes.
Perfect. So on this slide, I've just provided a quick overview of the topics I'll be covering today. So before I showcase our climate action programs and initiatives like the Weatherkeeper program, I thought this would be a great opportunity to provide a brief background on the Red River Métis and the Manitoba Métis Federation for those of you that are tuning in here in Winnipeg and also elsewhere around the province or around the world even maybe. And then I'll jump right into the MMF's Weatherkeeper program and the history of the program, how it first began, the priorities, how the data is collected and then shared and used. And finally, I'd just like to quickly highlight how it works together within our other MMF programming, like the Métis Community-Based Climate Monitoring Program. Next slide, please. So the Manitoba Métis Federation, or the MMF, represents more than 125,000 citizens within the provincial boundaries of Manitoba and thousands more across our national homeland around the world. The Red River Métis share the Michif language, national symbols such as the infinity flag, a cultural identity including fiddle music, the Red River jig, and our flower beadwork, as well as a special relationship with the land and water centered in the province we created. Manitoba is the only province in Canada to be negotiated into confederation by an Indigenous government. And more than 150 years later, the MMF and the Red River Métis continue to be stewards of the land and water of this province. So the Manitoba Métis Federation is authorized to protect the rights, claims, and interests of the Red River Métis, including those related to harvesting, traditional culture, and economic development. Our MMF caucus and cabinet, which is just on the left there, leads, manages, and guides the policies, objectives, and strategic direction of the Federation. Most importantly, all 23 members are democratically elected by our citizenship. Myself, I work in the Energy, Infrastructure, and Resource Management Department, which houses 7 ministerial portfolios alone, including environment and climate change, natural resources, traditional economies, agriculture, mining, and energy and infrastructure. So it's a very busy department. And then on the right there is our Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Minister Joanne Remillard, who I work with a lot on our programming and projects. Next slide, please. So the MMF is organized into 7 different regions throughout the entire province of Manitoba. Each one delivers programs and services to their specific geographical area. So you can kind of see it a little bit better on the right here. It's a little bit of a busy image, but those black boulders are kind of what's dividing the 7 regions. So up north there, we have the Churchill region. Just below that is the Northwest region and the Paw region. And then there's the Interlake region, Southwest, Southeast, and then the Winnipeg region. So within each of these regions, there are area-specific locals that can be created, and they have to have at least 9 Métis citizens to be registered. And we have approximately 140 MMF locals just in Manitoba. Thanks. After many years in the making, a self-government recognition and implementation agreement with Canada was signed on July 6, 2021, recognizing the MMF as the existing democratically elected government of the Red River Métis. This agreement ensures that MMF will continue to provide responsible and accountable self-government. The MMF has always understood the importance of climate and freshwater action to ensure the proper protection and restoration of water quality and ecosystem health within a framework of Red River Métis rights. Thank you. So the idea for the MMF's Weatherkeeper program first started when there was an apparent gap in the climate data being provided within the Environment and Climate Change Canada, or ECC's weather station network, specifically in northern Manitoba along the Manitoba Great Lakes, so in those remote areas. Unfortunately, we live in a time when climate change is expected to worsen the frequency, intensity, and impacts of different types of extreme weather events, which makes making weather increasingly unpredictable. So knowing the patterns of your local climate and environment is even more important for those who live on and off the land and waters, like our Red River Métis harvesters and fishers. So expanding this network was a priority for the MMF to ensure the safety of our citizens and to be able to provide them real-time climate data for their locals and regions that fall within these gap areas. Along with this, being able to conduct scientific and credible research in the Manitoba Great Lakes Basin, so that encompasses Lake Winnipeg, Lake Winnipegosis, and Lake Manitoba, to further the MMF's capacity to engage in decision-making processes as a government regarding climate and water quality in the area. So since 2021, the Manitoba Métis Federation has partnered with the Centre for Earth Observation Science, or CEOS, from the University of Manitoba to develop and then implement the Weatherkeeper program. So this program collects real-time climate data, as I mentioned, in the Manitoba Great Lakes region, with using weather stations, which is then all that information is logged and displayed on online data dashboards for local Red River Métis citizens, harvesters, commercial fishers, and the public in the area. So currently there are 3 weather stations that have been deployed, which are all maintained by Red River Métis weather keepers. So how the responsibility of this program sort of falls is that the U of M technical staff assist with compiling and analyzing the data, maintenance of the data dashboard and the Canwin website, which Claire will touch on a little later, providing training and support on weather station deployment, and assisting with any and all troubleshooting. Whereas the MMF technical staff, so myself and my department, we are responsible for the recruitment and site selection, the actual deployment of the stations, and training our Red River Métis citizens to become weather keepers that can do the maintenance and troubleshooting on the ground for us. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the stations measure wind speed, wind direction, rainfall, pressure, temperature, PAR or solar energy, humidity, and snow depth. While we'll also have our Red River Métis weather keepers provide observational records and photos of the current weather on generally a biweekly schedule so that we can ensure that what we're seeing being logged from the weather station is accurate to what's actually happening on the ground. So an example of a report is just on the left there. So it's general information on conditions of cloud cover or precipitation. And then on the right there is an actual weather station. Apologize, there was a couple photos from on the last slide as well, but you can see the arrows are pointing to all the weather station sensors. So on the top, there's the anemometer, which calculates the wind speed and wind direction. Below that is the PAR sensor, which is the solar radiation measurement. And then below that is the radiation shield, which measures temperature and pressure. And then below that is the solar panel. The weather station does run on a solar panel, but it also does have a battery, which is at the very bottom. And then above that is the logger box, which holds all of the where all the sensors will plug in and the computer of the weather station. And then just kind of further back to that, number 7 is where the rain gauge would be, or the snow depth. We would switch that out in the winter time. So next slide, please. Thank you. So as mentioned, there is currently 3 sites with weather stations with hopes to expand 1 in every MMF region. So there's 7 regions, so we're almost halfway there. The first station that was deployed was in Dawson Bay, which has a significant Métis commercial fishing community and in fact a Red River Métis owned fishing shed. So Dawson Bay is located on the western shores of Lake Winnipegosis. So can you see my mouse as I'm pointing to things? Probably not. That's okay. I've been kind of pointing to things throughout, so that's fine. But yeah, so Lake Winnipegosis is there on the top left. So it's on the the western shore of Lake Winnipegosis. The second station deployed was in St. Laurent, which is another established Métis community and has a long history of trapping, fishing, and trading by the Red River Métis in the area. St. Laurent is located on the eastern shores of Lake Manitoba and is actually where our MMF Interlake Regional Office is as well. So that's cool. And then finally, our third station that was deployed in 2023 was in East Shore, which is about an hour past St. Rose de Lac and is located on the eastern shores of Dauphin Lake, which, yes, thank you, Claire. That's awesome. And again, it is another water body that is rich in Métis history and has a highly established Métis community surrounding it. So as mentioned, the MMF is responsible for site selection and works closely with our citizens to determine areas that will be of most benefit to having a weather station in their local, as well as prioritizing residents on or near water bodies and, of course, within those gap areas of the ECC weather station network. So once the site has been chosen, MMF staff will then do an assessment of the area to determine an ideal location for the weather station, since nearby trees and infrastructure can disrupt or influence the data, specifically wind direction and wind speed. So we always try to put it in an area where this will be minimized as much as possible. Obviously, it is always not the case, but we try our best to put it in a location that will work well. Staff will also assess whether other monitoring can supplement the climate data, like conducting water quality sampling or wildlife monitoring. So that's where priority on residents near or on the water body is important. So we can always get them to do water quality sampling alongside the climate data that's being collected. So yeah, once the pre-deployment process has been completed, the fun starts with actually deploying the weather stations. So currently, all of our weather stations are from the manufacturer Hoskins and are deployed with all of the same sensors to make it easier on us to know exactly what should be there and to set it up the same way every time. So certain sensors require specific methodologies to follow, like facing the solar panels or the power sensor panels towards south to maximize their exposure to sunlight throughout the day. So these are always a consideration we have to make. One of the selling features for the Hoskins Weather Station is that most of their sensors are available as smart sensors. So this allows us to virtually plug and play the sensors is what the word is, or the coined term for it is, which is in fact makes it very easy to switch them out when they need to be repaired or replaced or switched among stations. And Claire knows this, we're always relabeling sensors from this station to this station. So it is easy in fact to do. So that is one thing we really like about these stations. Another benefit is that the logger box does not require Wi-Fi as it connects to the satellite with an Iridium chip to log the data. This was an especially important consideration as we're placing them in rural Manitoba areas without access to Wi-Fi or cell service. And then there's also the flexibility with the logger box to change the logging interval, which allows us to change it based on interest and needs of the site. So if we need more frequent logging, we can have it as real time, or I think right now it's logging 5 minutes of data every 15 minutes. So that's generally the rule of thumb, and maybe Claire will correct me on that, but next slide would be great. Thank you. So after the raw data has been, or I guess I should back up, once the weather station has been deployed and we're connected to the satellite and we're logging data, that raw data comes in and is collected from the weather station and then is then pulled by the CIOS team to be put in a more user-friendly format. That was one thing we really needed, is something that was a lot clearer to see, and again, not just a spreadsheet of information. So that's where the data dashboards were born. So they can be found on the CanWin website or the MMF website, and that's just under the department tabs, Energy, Infrastructure and Resource Management Department, the Environment and Climate Change portfolio, and then there'll be a little tab that says Weather Dashboards. So on my slide here, this is obviously an old image. I wish it was -7. It's actually, it could be -7 today. It's been much nicer today than it has been the last couple of weeks. But as you can see, all the sensors are clearly displayed with their current reading. So here on the left, you'll see, -7 temperature. And then to the right of that is a grid box, which also gives users the ability to go back and see trends for the day, week, or even months. So very user-friendly, and also yeah, it just looks great. I love how it looks. They've done a great job of it. So the raw data set, though, is also still available on the CanWin website for public use, and has our citation on it there if anyone wants to use it. So next slide, please. So data application. So once we've collected this data, what do we use it? So I've kind of touched on this throughout my presentation so far, but obviously a priority for us was to be able to share it with our locals and regions and have it accessible for citizens and harvesters to use every day, because with climate change, things are changing so fast, and it's great to be able to provide them with real-time climate data when they're out on the lake or they're thinking of going out to the lake that day. So that was one of the main uses or applications for this data, obviously for research purposes. So I'll touch on it a little bit later, but to complement the environmental data we're also collecting in the area through other programming and projects. So it's a great thing to have, even if we have no current projects that we're using that data with. At least we're creating a baseline to use in future projects and future research. There's hopes to hire a master's student or a PhD student or whatnot with University of Manitoba to analyze this data and maybe even take this research a step further. So that's always been an application that we're hoping to use this data for. And then again, just to be informed as a government and understand the impacts of climate change, because they're not affecting regions and locals equally, and they are generally affecting these northern regions a little harsher. So to be able to speak to these changes with different levels of government, whether it's the province or the federal government, and even internationally, so to be able to build that capacity within the MMF to speak to these issues and address them is always great. So as you can see, that's me with a fish down there. We were doing some fish spawning research on Duck Bay, which is potentially another site. Hopefully, I'm hoping that will be. So that would be a great way to complement, what we're doing there is having climate data. And then two, that's just some colleagues of mine and Minister Remillard again at COP this past year that spoke to the climate action that the MMF is currently undertaking. Yeah, so next slide, please. So the Weatherkeeper program has not only helped bolster projects and programs, it's contributed to the baseline data that we're collecting from the Métis Community-Based Climate Monitoring Program. So this program focuses on building capacity in Red River Métis citizens by providing them training and equipment to conduct their own environmental monitoring and to become a Red River Métis citizen scientist. So the available programming we have right now includes water quality monitoring, wetland monitoring, which is it's a wetland assessment. So there's wetland birds, there's amphibians, there's benthic invertebrates, and then there's also wetland classification in that. We also have tons of bird monitoring available right now. So there's winter bird monitoring, we're doing migratory bird monitoring, and just songbird monitoring and that sort of types. And then as well as, snow water equivalent and snow depth monitoring to predict flooding in certain areas. So Red River Métis citizen scientists have been conducting water monitoring in the Great Lakes, so Lake Manitoba, Lake Winnipeg, Lake Winnipegosis, for many years now, in addition to within the Red River Basin, which holds a rich history to Red River Métis, as it was traditionally used for transportation and harvesting in present-day Manitoba. It is also culturally important with its proximity to the heart of our national homeland. So the water quality of these watersheds has always been and continues to be a large concern for our citizens, harvesters, commercial fishers, elders, and youth, which all rely on them to continue practicing their Red River Métis rights. So the MMF Métis Communities Climate Monitoring Program was developed not only to integrate Western science with Red River Métis was developed to not only integrate Western science with Red River Métis traditional knowledge, but to also guide our department's programming and projects, whether that's determining potential impacts from proposed projects and developments on lands and waters, or to again inform the MMF cabinet and leadership team. And this is done through, traditional knowledge interviews, ground truthing, many other, non-traditional forms of gathering data, but are still held or even held higher, I would say, than, Western science methods. So yeah, I think that was it for my slides, but hopefully I kind of touched on everything. I'm hoping there'll be lots of questions. So if I missed anything, please put them in the chat, but I think Claire's going to kind of talk more about the back end stuff that CanWin and CEOS are doing. So thank you.
Thank you, Phoenix. That was really interesting. And yes, so as Phoenix said, I'm going to provide a brief overview of what CanWin is, how you can navigate it when you visit our site, and then highlight, as Phoenix has already shown you briefly, some of the tools that were developed specifically for the Weatherkeeper program, but can be used over multiple programs. So the Canadian Watershed Information Network, for those who aren't familiar with us, is a Canadian data repository. It's hosted at the University of Manitoba, and it's managed by the Centre for Earth Observation Science within the Clayton H. Riddle Faculty of Environment, Earth and Resources. We work with a variety of people, organizations, and governments to support the sharing of research and citizen science data from within the Churchill-Nelson River watershed. So this image just gives you an overview of what that area covers in Canada, and it does go into the states. Covers technically 4 US states as well. And it goes into the Arctic where we continue our research. We are also part of the Canadian Consortium for Arctic Data Interoperability, which is made up of the groups listed at the bottom here. And that is a pan-Canadian collaboration between 6 universities and multiple Indigenous governmental and nonprofit organizations. And it was established to support a culture of standardizing data sharing and interoperability in Arctic research, where we also face the same challenges. So the CanWin system is steered by a set of principles and services that facilitate our core mandate, which is to lower the latency for real-time decision-making by supporting the ethical and fair sharing of data across that freshwater marine spectrum. And on the left of the slide there, you'll just see the 3 pillars that make up our our core mandate. And so a fundamental component of our work is creating tools for data access and to support researchers and our collaborators like the MMF in the curation and publication of key information about data sets. So that's really the metadata about data. And then also is making accessible data by making data accessible and understandable to the broadest possible audience. So on the right here, you'll see these are just an example of user interfaces that are available online publicly so that people, our collaborators or researchers that are needing help curating and standardizing their data can use some of these tools instead of having to do it all manually themselves. So this is an example of the part of the CanWin homepage. And from that page, there are multiple ways that users can search for the data. So they can search spatially by using the map here. They can use the quick links option to go to either pre-created dashboards like the weather station dashboard, or it also allows you to directly access some of the other platforms that we use to share data. And they can also search for data by using the search bar, which is on the right here. And so in this example page, search page here, you'll see an example of what we will be rolling out in the next iteration of our homepage and site functions, which will be rolled out by March, which is that users will not only have the option to search for data that we provide and host ourselves, but also data that is provided by the Government of Canada Open Data Portal and by one of our freshwater collaborators, the Columbia Basin Hub, which hosts community-based monitoring data for the Columbia Basin, which is in BC. So now I'm just going to touch briefly upon some of the tools that were specifically created for the Weatherkeeper project. So at the top of the screen here, I'm not going to go into detail, but that is the overall workflow for Weatherkeeper data. So the initial workflow and dashboards shown on this page were set up originally by one of our colleagues in Seattle, Wayne Chan. So as Phoenix mentioned, all the raw data and project materials that have been created, they are actually stored on a private GitLab repository, which is hosted at U of M, but which the MMF controls access to. So the MMF administrator then chooses which documents they want to make public and transfer to that CanWin public data site. And as Phoenix also mentioned, the dashboard on the left was designed in collaboration with the Métis Citizen weather keepers, who wanted a very straight way to view their weather data. And on the right, one of the other tools we created was a smart mirror prototype, which can be scaled up to be displayed on a large screen as well as a small screen. So it can be used, for example, for community viewing. And this removes the need for users to access a computer directly to view that weather data, and it will cycle through multiple stations. So with some additional funding we received from Natural Resources Canada, we were able to create also an interactive mapping dashboard. So this dashboard allows users to take a deeper dive into the data because they are able to access the data as a geospatial layer in our mapping platform. So on the left here, you will see that we have shown the two of the weather stations. And if a user clicked on that weather station, they would be able to view the weather station sensor data on the left. And if they click on any of those sensor data, you will see a graph of that data. And users are then able to create maps, and as well, they are able to add additional data layers from other weather stations we've made accessible. So for example, as Phoenix mentioned, there was a lack of Environment and Climate Change Canada's weather stations in the areas, some of the areas which the MMF is attempting to fill. But the weather stations that are available through ECCC are also of interest. So users are able to add those stations on the right and able to access and view that data. So here you can see users can then compare sensor data from multiple stations. So here they're viewing the MMF weather station as well as two other ECCC weather stations, and they're viewing temperature data for all of them for a specific time period that the user can choose. And the user can also subset and download that data series as a CSV file for further analysis. And the final visualization that was created was a story map, which was developed by the MMF, which allows users to scroll through the Weatherkeeper project as a story. And this map was created in English, Michif, and French. And in addition, on the bottom right here, you can see this is the home page of the MMF Weatherkeeper program as seen on CanWin. And all the materials, all the key materials were also created and made available in English, Michif, and French. So that is my very, very brief overview of some of the tools and abilities of CanWin at the moment. And I want to thank you for your attention, and we are open for questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the presentation. Just look to the Q&A here. We have one question. It says from an anonymous attendee, you may have explained this, and I might have missed it, but is there a process criterion for determining where the weather stations are located?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I didn't really touch too much on that process, but there is an application form on our website. So again, under that department, Environment and Climate Change Portfolio tab, there is on our webpage there an application form that citizens that are interested can fill out. And from there, yeah, well, there is a bit of a screening process. So again, those considerations for the pre-assessment are always made. So if it's someone in their backyard with tons of trees around them, we kind of have to think of, is this going to be a valuable location, and what kind of information is this going to be able to provide us? As well as we do have like priority areas that we are looking at doing. So one of them being like within that gap area for the network of ECC weather stations, as well as on or near the water body, on or near a Great Lakes water body is also a priority for us. And in addition, someone who is a resident there full time as well. Yearly, we do have folks that are interested and have cabins, but unfortunately the maintenance that can be required does need them to be at least near that weather station more than, just for one season of the year. So there is a bit of a criteria process and screening process that they go through, but for the majority of citizens that are interested, we can generally work with them on trying to find a good site to put the weather station on.
Wonderful. Just checking, sometimes people put questions in the chat here. I think this is more of a comment from Anamika. Thank you for the presentation. That was great. Manitoba Agriculture has many weather stations in Manitoba as well. And I'm wondering whether there is any collaboration between your network and the network maintained by Manitoba Agriculture.
Thanks for the question. Not yet, not saying that it won't ever happen. I know that, yeah, there is a lot of centers in the southern area, because that's a lot of where the agriculture producers in Manitoba are located. So again, a lot of the areas that we are targeting are more northern Manitoba. So the more north you go, the less those stations tend to occur. So, but definitely not something that's off the table for the MMF. We would be happy to work with the province on expanding this network if they were open to it as well.
Wonderful, thank you. We also have a question in the chat from Ricardo Mantilla. Can you speak more about this, in quotation marks, data as a story? Maybe a few more examples with more general data. So I guess what is meant by data as story?
You want me to start that, Phoenix? Or do you want
Sure,
to?
yeah.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen because that might be easier. So specifically, Ricardo, when we say that, essentially what we've done is create story maps, which allow us to share data mapping layers as well as other information.
Or we're just seeing we just saw the last slide of the presentation, not story map.
Yeah, I have to figure out how that works. Okay, okay. So from the you should be able to see the website now.
Yeah.
So from the CanWin site, if you went to visualizations and stories, so dashboards and stories are the way that we share data in a way to tell the full story. So in the case when we started working with the MMF, you can see we've got the Weatherkeeper program maps here. And what happens then is, so they wanted a way to tell the sort of the original story of the Weatherkeeper program in a way that was consistent and visual, so that they could show it anywhere. So here, the user can scroll down. They can see these are the original sites that we had. It's interactive because if you click on this, you're actually seeing the data layer of the site, and you can go directly to the dashboard from there. And then there's text or other images that show the various data dashboards. This is another example of a mapping layer. So someone can see, in this case, we're showing the ECCC station layers as well as the MMF station in red. Because this is interactive again, you could actually click and view data from all the watershed layers we've made it available. And essentially it just continues on talking about the entire Weatherkeeper program and then gives you contact information. So those stories can be created for any, they can be created without data, but in our case, we create them and add those data layers that we already host. This is an example here of a story, which is the same idea as the Weatherkeeper program, but was created externally through another mapping service. And then we have a graphic novel, for example. So this is a video that plays to tell about research conducted on beluga whales in Churchill. I don't know if that helps answer your question.
Great. So I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, but I do have a question. So I know that there's been a partnership between MMF and U of M for a number of years now. And I really enjoyed this presentation. Every time I get to learn more about the partnership and the work that you're doing. There are a lot of people on this call, I think, that are interested in doing kind of community-based research similar to this. So I'm curious from both of you, what do you think makes this partnership successful? What's allowed you to do this work together?
I think, well, you know, Claire's been a part of this project before I was even a part of this project. So that's always great, having her here and her support and her expertise as well, and as well as the connection she has at the University of Manitoba. So for myself, I think it's been great to learn from her. And I think that we both bring different areas of expertise and then also different responsibilities to this project. And I find that no one group is doing more than the other, which is also really great when there's that equal partnership. But yeah, so Claire and her team have been so great with always clearing their schedule to help us with training events. We did a team training event last summer to help my staff work with me on, you know, deploying weather stations, because I didn't come into this as an expert when it came to the weather stations. So it's always great to have more people to know how to deploy them and how to maintain them, seeing as our department is traveling so much throughout the province. So it's great to be able to deploy them out and have them check on those weather stations, because I can't be at 3 places at once sometimes. But then too, it's also, I have a really great relationship with our citizens just through the Métis Community-Based Climate Monitoring Program, because that is a very one-to-one relationship where I'm providing them that training and that equipment and then helping them with their site selection. So I think that being able to bring that to the program is always great. And then Claire has, you know, her wonderful team that is also always down to help us, and we're always so appreciative of this partnership that we can lean on them for those sort of things. So I'm not sure if you have anything to add, Claire.
I think that was a great summary. Thank you very much. Yeah, I definitely wouldn't work without, obviously, the MMF finding this information important for them, for their programming.
Yeah, thank you so much. I noticed there's another question in the chat. Tim Papakariaku says, thank you for your talk. You may have mentioned this, but what are the major technical issues that you've experienced with the stations?
Yeah, there's definitely been a few. It's not easy for sure. I would say that the biggest technical issue generally is the climate. So, you know, St. Laurent, we had a weather station that was down for a bit because it wasn't, we weren't receiving any wind data or wind speed, and we went out there, and sure enough, it's on the coast there of Lake Manitoba. There's not a lot of vegetation to protect these weather stations, so it was just a big wind event that took the sensor right off, and we didn't know until we went to go see. So yeah, definitely there's some challenges with that, with actually dealing with climate change and these increased weather events. I would also say too that not being an expert in this sort of thing, there's definitely been a learning curve. Not all of the sensors are smart plug ones. There has been some adaptations that we've had to do to the weather stations as well, and whether it was extending the sensor cords down so that they could reach the cord or the logger box. But yeah, there's always trial and error in these sort of projects, trying to figure out which car batteries work the best in this temperature. I learned a lesson that I accidentally put alkaline batteries in there, and those are terrible in, extreme weather. So, there's always going to be learning curves in that way. But I would say for, technical issues, it's just adapting to these extreme weather events and being able to be there and troubleshoot. And then also just making sure that our weather keepers are also properly trained on troubleshooting to minimize the damage as well that can occur to them.
Great. So in the chat, not the Q&A, we have a question from Adele Perry. They state, I'm thinking of how this work could be connected with historical work or research. The Hudson's Bay Company Archive has a lot of material with weather data. Is there any way to connect this material with that?
That's a great question. Again, not something that I do personally, but I know that in our department we have traditional knowledge interview specialist. So she is always conducting interviews with our citizens and collecting that historical data, as long as that modern present data. And it can be from anything to do with climate to environmental changes that they're noticing to berry spots or hunting spots that are changing, and different animal populations that were once there and now are here. So definitely something that we have information on as well, and I would love to see these two things integrated. And that's kind of, again, where I was showing that this program, it's bolstered our Métis community-based climate monitoring program. So I know that it can be applied throughout our projects and programs, and I would love to see something like that where we can combine historical data along with this as well. So yeah, that's a really great point. Thank you.
Wonderful. So we have a question from Jeffrey Gunn. Thanks for the presentation. Are you hearing any other environmental monitoring concerns or interests from MMF citizens and communities?
Yeah, I would say that that's always top of mind. The MMF has regional meetings every year, and then it has its annual general assembly, which is generally in the fall time, and brings together all citizens, delegates, regions, locals together. And that is top of mind for everyone, whether it's to do with, climate change and environmental impacts, to their harvesting rights, to just recreationally, where they, their family used to use this area, now they can't. So I would say water quality is a huge concern for the MMF as well, and that's sort of why we do prioritize putting weather stations near water bodies, so that these two monitoring programs can complement each other, so we can see what's happening in the water. And if maybe there's an attribute or there's an influence from the climate as well, of course there would be, but it's always great to have the full picture when you're monitoring in an area. So that's kind of why when we are picking these sites as well, we are offering to the citizens to conduct water monitoring, to conduct wildlife monitoring, to conduct vegetation monitoring. It's a lot, but generally the people that do come to us, they're excited, and they want to make a difference, and they want to, maybe this is like their second life, they're retired and they never got to do this at their full-time job. So it is really cool to be able to work with them. And I know that they're very passionate about it, and they take it very seriously, because it is their livelihood at the end of the day that's being impacted. So yeah, there's definitely lots of concern around environmental monitoring when it comes to our citizens, and we're working with them and building that capacity so that they can also help us with environmental monitoring because we can't be everywhere at once. So
Great, thank you. Oh, Marcos Cordero, Claire, on the technical side, did you find any particularity in the MMF project that is different from different than a conventional weather network, e.g. ECCC? You mentioned the satellite data transfer and plug and play. Is there any difference?
Yeah, so I would say probably the biggest difference is that conventional ECCC or weather stations that are used as part of the World Monitoring Network are, I believe they're 10 meters tall. But our weather stations, because they are maintained by individuals who need to be able to access them safely and easily, ours are 3 meters tall. So on our website, all of our data sets come with the caveat that these stations are lower than conventional weather stations. Now, that being said, we can do the comparison to ensure that, to understand what those differences mean at the end of the day. And that's why things like taking pictures of the area all around and the MMF being selective in where those stations are put up is important.
Great, just checking here. I don't see any other questions. There's a note in the chat from Tim Papakariakou following up that at CIOS, we'd be happy to help with those technical issues if needed. So with that, I guess I'll say thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. Great to hear more about the program. And thank you to all of our audience members for coming today and for having such an engaged Q&A session. Thank you to Pauline Tennant, of course, for from Center for Human Rights Research for helping us manage this webinar. So we have 2 more talks in the speaker series for this year. On February 26th, I'm really happy to say we have Deborah McGregor, who will come to speak about the ontology of water. Our final talk this year will be on March 18th with Melanie O'Gorman and Stuart Hill on long-term drinking water advisories in Manitoba First Nations. What is needed to sustainably resolve them? So yeah, 2 more very exciting talks ahead of us. So with that, I guess we'll end this webinar, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.